we don't talk shit about Sweden, so we can keep using that domain name. That's what I've been told. So I have been abandoned. I was asked to join as a host, and I've loved it. And then I went on assignment, as they say. I come back, and they've abandoned me. So I think this was all a setup. But
they went on assignment this week.
They went on assignment. That's what they say. Yeah. But so Master Chin is out this week, so is Doxy. But Vic has been so kind to sit here, so you guys don't have to hear an hour monologue, and which I'd be more than happy to do. And they're like, no, it's okay. We'll find someone. So how's your week been? Any highlights?
No, it's been like a normal week. Hasn't been that much in the news this week, though. You know.
Yeah, I mean, there's some things. Yeah, it's been an interesting week. I got back from England. That's where I was on assignment to the UK. It was my first time over in the UK, so it was interesting to see the different way the world works over there. A few things like security-wise, even because this is a security STEM podcast. I noticed, and I don't know if people know, and I didn't know, so when you pay with credit cards, they bring the device to you. You never actually see your card leave, which to me, I'm like, well, like, why? Just why do we do that? Why? It just one of those things.
Yeah, pin and chip is still, you can completely take that. Europeans are very much troubled when their card disappears, when they take the card and leave. When they come here,
which I understand. I completely understand that. So it's like, why is that not standard here?
Right.
Like, why is that? Like, it's contactless. There's no, because I've had my credit card stolen from a waitress or something, like stealing my credit card number because they can leave for 10 years with it. Mm-hmm. That was just one of the things I observed going over to England. A few other things, like they actually serve coffee at drinking temperature, which I don't know why we don't serve coffee at drinking temperature here.
Right.
Like, you get coffee from Starbucks, you burn your tongue. I don't know. There, it's like I waited, my normal 5 minutes, and I took a sip, and I was like, it's cold. Oh, they actually serve coffee at drinking temperature in this country.
Either that or it's just colder there.
Or maybe. No, it wasn't. It was actually beautiful. Like, England tricked me because it was sunny and like 80 degrees all week long. And I was like, I could totally live here. And I don't think
those 5 days you could totally
those 5 days, like those 5 days, I could totally live here. Yeah. But those were just a few things that I noticed when I was over there. So I'm not sure if you've had lots of experience, but there was just a few things.
Oh yeah, it's always interesting when you go to new places.
Yeah. I'm still actually on the other time zone because I'm usually a night owl. And since coming back, I've been waking up at 6 a.m. every morning, going to the gym. I'm like, yes, this is great. I don't know how long it's going to last, but I'm riding the train while I can.
All you can do is just keep at it. Yeah.
Keep at it, yeah.
So were you in the South or you're London?
I was in Bath.
Oh,
I actually didn't go to London at all. I went over to Bath and just went over there. I love history, explored the area. Yep. Kind of did my own thing.
You see all the Roman monuments?
Yeah. I went to the Roman bath, got to try the water, tasted horrible.
Yeah, it's full of sulfur.
Yeah. That'll explain it. But I felt healthier. I'm sure it's something. I'm just kidding.
Well, lithium. It has a lot of lithium in it.
There we go.
They calm me down.
There we go. I only took a tiny sip because it wasn't great. So I don't think I can attribute too much to that.
Well, you can absorb it through your skin.
Oh, good. So I should have taken a bath. I didn't.
Well, that's what they used to do.
I know. I should have. I didn't. Dang it. Now I need to go back. That'll be my excuse to go back. So a few things that I noticed this week. The iPhone, the new iPhone jailbreak that they just said that came out. Right. I thought that was interesting. So they said that from 4S all the way up through the X.
Yeah, every single release.
That there's in the chip. It's actually in the hardware.
Right.
So that's interesting. So that's the first one since jailbreak since
It's been 2 years, I think. So this is a chip level, a boot ROM. Yeah. That's so they can't do a software patch that's going to fix this because it allows you to go at boot level, but you do need physical access to the device.
Yeah, that's good news. So just keep your phone close, or if you find a phone, then you can maybe get. There's a way.
Yeah. That's interesting.
It's good for interesting.
Yeah. So is this going to increase iPhone theft?
I mean, do you think the average iPhone thief is going to be able to do this?
Before they put the bricking feature in, it was the most stolen phone.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. It was. But I still have to go back to if the average iPhone thief is going to be like, I'm just going to jailbreak, I don't know. I mean, it can be done remotely over USB. I know that. So, but not remotely, sorry, over USB.
Right.
But it can be initiated over USB. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's as much of a concern as if it. But I guess that's like the balance, if it can be fixed with a patch, then it can be done remotely.
Right.
But if it can't be done remotely, then, but it's interesting. It's definitely interesting for research and everything like that. So.
Well, there's been a number of chip vulnerabilities come out. Intel's got chip vulnerabilities right now that, as far as memory allocation and a couple of other items that's going on. So there's a lot of chip level investigation that's happening. I think that's how they found it.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, and I think it's interesting, especially since it gets excuse me, published. Obviously it was a researcher who found that, and I always think that's interesting for research and just kind of progressing, seeing in it, and it encourages these companies to further their research, which I actually love about the security community is like the researchers who are out there who are doing that research, who put their time and their effort into finding ways to break things, really inspires the people to fix things. So it was interesting. I was actually, at least in my opinion, I've seen that. I mean,
it's a recent development.
Yeah.
Until recently, even Apple wouldn't admit when things were broken.
Yeah. Yeah.
They had a hard time in 2009.
Well, I don't think they have much of a choice, do they? If they're just releasing it publicly as a researcher who's saying, "Look, I found this. I found this." I mean, I guess it's those
right.
things.
Well, all it has to do, if you can get into the phone at that level, you can own the phone.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, I know that specifically. So with my job and what I do, I was researching a little bit about kiosk hacking because I do some social, physical, security. And there was a guy that was actually pretty big for a long time who spoke at DEF CON and some of these things. And he was saying how he would start doing these kiosk hacking and doing these talks. And the kiosk companies obviously would respond and be like, well, we got to make our stuff more secure, And he was just kind of saying how he was kind of responsible for is kind of like his like this twofold thing, because he wanted to find these exploits. He wanted to be the one to, be able to own all these kiosks, but he also was responsible for making them more secure and making it harder for him to own them. So right. I think it's always this interesting play where these researchers are helping security, or even people who are just even hackers. They're people who are hacking these things are making it more secure by that, because if people weren't hacking, then, or if they didn't release their hacking and people didn't know, then, there would be no motivation to make it more secure.
Yeah, I fully support release of exploits responsibly.
Yeah.
So you go to the company, you say, I have this exploit, I understand how this works, and we should talk. And if the company doesn't respond within a fairly timely manner, they should understand that it's going to be released.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what's going to happen. I think keeping things hid is how we get weaponized attacks. They start stockpiling attacks, and then nobody knows about them. You don't know how to defend against them. You can't fix them. And so not talking about them is like the worst thing we can do.
And I think I think that if I'm right, things are changing. I know there was a time where you could reach out to a company and be like, hey, I found this exploit, I found this thing, and they'd be immediately respond, block you, you're, dead to them, and now I think they're starting to respond a little bit better. They're seeing the incentives of this. So, a lot of these bigger companies are on places like HackerOne with the bug bounties. They're on these places where they're wanting to reward people for finding these exploits because they're seeing the value in that.
Right. In the past, we've seen municipalities go after people who have found exploits in their kiosks for their public transportation.
Yeah.
There was, I think it was the city of Boston, sued and got a court injunction to stop a talk about how their kiosk system for purchasing fares on their public transit could be manipulated. And so they actually stopped a talk at DEF CON and threatened them with arrest if they did it. So, that wasn't 10 years ago. That was probably 8 years ago. And so we're still seeing that.
Yeah. I completely agree. And I think that's, and I, that's a perfect idea, the example of how that could work. And yeah. Sorry, I'm laughing at the live stream chat. If you guys aren't on our Discord, we have a Discord chat you guys can join. It's great. They're making me laugh right now. All right, so let's go on to, what was the other? Quantum computing.
Yeah.
So obviously
Google.
That's like a thing that everyone, like, I think we've been hearing about quantum computing for like, I don't know, a few years. And it's always been this like, oh, quantum computing is going to change the world. It's going to change encryption. It's going to change everything. And so I was reading through the news, doing my due diligence, trying to prepare so I can talk to you guys and not look like an idiot. They were saying that Google has achieved quantum computing. So it was apparently an article that was released on NASA website and then has since been removed. But apparently there's this white paper now that's now floating around through the science community that's talking about how they've achieved quantum supremacy. So they have a quantum computer that's supposedly able to do these calculations that a regular computer would not be able to do. And that's the metric that they're achieving this quantum supremacy. The calculation that it's able to do is useless. It's just, a standard to go by to see how hard it is. And so what are your thoughts on that? So
if I did my homework, basically what they're doing is doing a digital representation of an interference field.
Okay.
A quantum interference field. It's not really quantum computing. It's quantum computing that's calculating a quantum interference field.
Okay.
And in order for a normal computer would take thousands of years to break this same code. So what it's delivering is what appears to be unbreakable encryption keys.
Yeah.
And that's what it's delivering. That's what the quantum supremacy is that they have a way to generate encryption keys that can't be broken over a very long time period.
Yeah. So, and I was kind of looking into a little bit more about it, and I know other companies like Intel and some of these other computers who are also in their own race to make these quantum computers. They're kind of disregarding it, saying that, well, this computation that they're doing isn't really useful. This is just like a proof of concept, like that it's possible, but they're trying to base their metric on if it's something that's actually going to advance technology in the sense that it's a useful computation. So, I mean, I know what you were saying was interesting, but that was just like the other point of view I was seeing. Of course, they're a competitor, so of course they're gonna, say things a little bit differently.
Well, it's complicated because it's quantum, but it's pretty straightforward. The point that everybody is shooting for, what they're trying to obtain by quantum computing, is secure computing.
Yeah.
Or breaking security.
Or, depending on what side you're on.
Right, depending on which side you're on. So they're either trying to create quantum computing that's going to break unbreakable encryption, or they're trying to use quantum computing to immediately break today's encryption.
Yeah.
So that's the two sides of what they're trying to go for when they're investigating that kind of quantum computing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that brings us back to that first point, opposite back around, that it's going to be that twofold thing that, as things, I mean, I still think this is pretty far down the road with quantum computing, but as things start being where the encryption is going to be broken by the quantum computing, there will be also the capabilities to create, like you said, the encryption to go the opposite way. So you can,
right.
It's that constant balance.
Well, they're either leveraging the capabilities of quantum computing against the encryption that's available today, or they're trying to generate that quantum computing that allows them to be able to have a longer tail on their encryption.
So has it actually broken encryption yet, or is it just, because I know there was, or is it just the capability that it can do enough calculations and within a certain period that it potentially has the ability to break encryption?
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. When you're looking at encryption, it's always like how long it's good for. So the best encryption most people use today is good for about, with today's computing, about 30, 35 years, which is long enough to keep you safe. As of right now, there's probably nothing that can break real time, the encryption that we have.
Yeah. Yeah. Depending what encryption you're using, I guess.
Right. Well, the best suggested.
Yeah, the best, yes. Okay. Pretty cool. But I mean, it makes me think. I don't actually. One of the first times I heard about quantum computing. So I'm actually fairly new to the IT security sector. I've only been in this 2 years now, year and a half, 2 years, and I know the first time I heard about it was actually at a blockchain group, and they were talking about quantum computing and quantum currency. Actually, is what they called it. They had quantum. I'm not going to go down that path, but they were talking about how the computations with it and how it's going to change the world. And I thought it was just interesting. It was just bringing me back to when I barely knew anything. I was just like, this still doesn't make sense, and I don't know anything. But it was interesting. They were talking about the path of how money has changed throughout the years and how technology has changed in relation to, and how they thought quantum computing was going to change how we do money. Which, I mean, who knows? It's, quantum computing is still years down the road for it to be real. But so it was just interesting. It was just a thought I was just thinking about, was how it relates to blockchain. I'm thinking these Bitcoin people using the quantum computers to mine those computations. But
right. The quantum computing and using like cryptocurrency would be for transaction processing speed.
Yeah.
Like the big bottleneck now for any crypto exchange is how fast it can do those processes.
Yeah.
And that's with all banking. Right now they have a limit of their process speed. Yeah. And so quantum computing and items like that would help banking. You wouldn't have there's a significant lag time for execution of process in banking. Mm-hmm. And so that's what there's a lot of money going into that research just to be able to reduce that time.
Which I guess that makes sense, quantum computing. But then with quantum computing, does that mess up blockchain? Because, well, maybe not blockchain itself, but I mean, if you think about the way that people get Bitcoin for mining Bitcoin, I mean, if you had a quantum computer, that's just the computational power.
Right.
I mean, that just kind of, in my mind, maybe would ruin the whole idea, or they would just maybe change. I don't know.
Well, the quantum computer could crack the keys.
Yeah.
And therefore, it could unlock your wallet, what you have secured.
Yeah, even there. Yeah. Right, so Bitcoin itself is Yeah,
it's at risk. Yeah.
While it might even be better in one way, like you were saying, that it gets the banking faster, towards the other. Interesting.
Well, not if you have a quantum encryption set. Then even quantum can't break the quantum encryption.
That's true. That's true. Because then you were saying, we go up to as that gets, breaks more, it will get more secure in reverse. So, any more thoughts about quantum theory and the future of quantum computing?
They recently announced that they were able to do entanglement between two particles, which is part of this quantum computing.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think they had it for, it was less than a second, but it was like 500 nanoseconds.
Yeah.
Or maybe a little bit over that, and which was a huge jump from where they were before. So the closer they can get to stabilizing an entanglement or maintaining an entanglement will be the demonstration of how they're getting closer to quantum computing on a whole.
Yeah. And I think we have a community bike.
I was just going to say one of the practical implications of quantum computing being on the horizon is if you were to look at the cryptography standards and recommendations that are coming out of places like NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, the recommendations that they publish now are that you try to use standards and algorithms that are believed to be resistant to probable future quantum computer-enabled attacks. Mm-hmm. So in terms of what concrete effects this has been having, actually for a number of years, that's one of them.
It's just that preemptive attempt.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the concern is really that your communications, say military or diplomatic communications, get intercepted today, can't be broken today, but do get stored.
That's true.
And 7 or 10 years, or maybe even before the end of a current administration, right? You do something in the early days of your first year in office, and by year 7, suddenly quantum computing is a real, issue, and someone has cracked these cables that they've had sitting around. So to try to see that, coming, NIST and related agencies have published recommendations to avoid that attack. And there's actually a long history of this. We know now that things like the data encryption standard, DES, was designed to be resistant to an attack known as linear cryptanalysis, which was not even publicly known at the time. So we're not always behind the 8 ball on this stuff. Some of it is.
I don't envy those people who are putting their brains. It's like, I need you to protect against something that doesn't exist yet.
And then watch every user down the chain not follow what you suggest.
Yeah, as always, bad behavior will destroy all of your math.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Put make stuff available publicly. We've seen a lot of that lately. A lot of documents that's been stolen and then made public, and it was all off of people not following the NIST as a general rule and just completely violating it. And so having that out there is great, but if you can't enforce the use of that, there's a problem. There's an even bigger problem.
That's true. I mean, merely publishing the standards, we have published standards that are just gorgeous, that are too expensive or complex or cumbersome, or just that there's not enough incentive in one way or another for companies to actually implement them. But it is important to know that your tax money does go somewhere on this stuff.
Yeah.
There are well thought through, meaningful steps you can take. It's public information. And in some cases, a small business that decides to actually think about this can easily be well ahead of a large one.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, doing the research and looking at that. It reminds me of an article I read not too long ago that was a study that was done. And they gave 2 groups of developers information about what they wanted developed. And one group, they actually asked specifically, make sure it's secure, add security in. And they did. They actually thought about security, but the group that wasn't specifically asked about security didn't.
Right. Yeah, and you can't bolt it on.
Yeah, and they went against even like just general standard security practices that they could do.
Yeah, trying to bolt on security as a feature, the best analogy for the physical world is starting with the wrong alloy and trying to plate it. You don't have the mechanical properties of the plating.
I have a copper plane, but I'm going to put steel plating.
Yeah, we're gonna put a nice coating on this, and everyone, it'll look like it's made out of stainless steel. It's actually made of wet cardboard.
Yeah, or that it's even.
Yeah. You gotta start with the right problem to solve and be serious about solving it.
And that's actually it's great to know that there are people like trying to think about the future of what are going to be the next, like you said, quantum computing. What is that going to mean for encryption? How can we jumpstart that and make our encryption more secure now? So things that we want secure now will still be secure in 5 years, 10 years, or whatever that time frame may be.
Yeah, and for anyone who later wants to just kind of take a quick glance at the Wikipedia rabbit hole on this stuff, you can take a look at what is called post-quantum encryption. And also familiarize yourself with elliptic curve cryptography, both of which will give you a little bit of grounding for what some of the issues are on this. You can also look at Shor's algorithm, SHOR, for an example of one of the kind of elemental placeholders they're looking at in quantum cryptography and quantum computing to try to understand where we might have an attack that's meaningfully better. Shor's algorithm is interesting in as much as it was one of the things that was plausible to compute on things like the D-Wave equipment, which were, you may remember those. Those are the computers that everyone bickered about whether or not they were actually quantum computers, because what they were really doing is quantum annealing. You run them 1,000 times and see if the average answer is evident. And Shor's algorithm actually works in things like that. So in addition to the stuff that is kind of academically formal quantum computer science. We also have a lot of stuff that doesn't get talked about as much on the fringes, things that maybe work on these annealing systems that the mathematicians don't want to talk about because they're not pure, and the physicists don't want to talk about because they're not real quantum computers. Well, if they crack crypto, they're going to be real fast.
Yeah, is the application real? Then we
should
probably
the
really
result.
think about it.
and so in a field that is still largely dominated by double PhDs, this is a real problem. Because they don't even want to talk about things that don't meet their personal kind of clear vision of what these computers should be. There isn't a lot of agreement about how the code should look yet. But some of these fringe things from entrepreneurs who are like, you know what, I bet this is close enough. Maybe I could make a meaningful dent with this.
Yep.
That's a giant blind spot.
Yeah.
Yep. I agree. Well, you have the academics on one side wanting this purity of scope, and on the other side you have bureaucracy who won't enforce its own rules on their elites as well, because in every single data breach, be it a government data breach or a banking data breach or anything that you've heard of in the last 5 years, it's all been a decision at upper management because it was too cumbersome for them to continue down that road. And it was either an end user couldn't suffice, but it was a decision made, not that the technology failed.
Yeah,
it was a decision.
It's always been that trade-off, that of usability versus security or whatever it may be. And this actually, I love Community Mike because that takes a lot of pressure off of me of not knowing everything, because it's like, obviously I didn't know a lot of this information, but it's great. I completely agree that with all that. So.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. So quantum computing. So quantum physics broken down on a podcast. No,
there you go.
Quantum computing.
Right.
Yeah. So let's see. We talked about that. Another thing that came out this week, DNS over HTTPS.
Yep.
Or not came out this week. It's been something they've been working on since Google and Mozilla have been working on it since 2018.
Right.
May, something like that.
Yeah, testing in their systems.
Yeah, testing in their systems. But now it's kind of one of the things that they're kind of trying to start implement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As default in their browsers.
As default, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And just so people listening, I know we've kind of been talking at a lower level to kind of bring it back up to a higher level. DNS is kind of how when you your computer, when you search for a website and I want to go to google.com or I want to go to Facebook, it goes to the DNS server and it says, okay, what is this? What is the IP address? So people don't have to remember the IP address of where they want to go. So over HTTPS would make it encrypted. So when I type in where it is, it's encrypted transmission. So a man in the middle or somebody, they might not see what you're sending to Facebook or what you're sending to whatever site, but they can see what site you're going to. So when it's encrypted, that kind of goes away. So when if you're talking about things like, we'll just say like Pornhub, you're going to Pornhub, you might not know what you're sending to Pornhub, but you know what's, you know you're going there. You're going there. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of more clear with security and privacy intact what the situation is. And that's kind of where it gets into some of the security about that. Right. What's your kind of thoughts on this new?
Well, DNS as it sets today, I would say the vast majority of DNS traffic today is in the clear, which means when you type in the website in your browser and you hit enter, not just the DNS provider that you've selected, but also anybody that's on that stream, including your ISP or anybody monitoring that stream, will have a clear picture of what site you just requested. Mm-hmm. With DNS over HTTPS, it cannot be monitored. And that gives you a layer of security for your browser and your traffic and what's going on. And it gives a real headache to ISPs and governments and ISPs following governmental rules such as UK and Australia, Germany, that says you have to limit traffic to these locations.
Yeah.
And one way is they do it, one way that your ISP understands where you're going and can say, don't go to this site to download torrents, and then you get an email that says, hey, why did you do torrents? It's because they're able to inspect your DNS traffic. So this is a big jump towards personal security and privacy. There's two good companies out there. There's Quad9, which is the DNS service of 9.9.9.9, and then there's also it's 1.1.1.1, and I'll remember its name here in a minute. Was it Cloudflare?
Cloudflare, yeah, Cloudflare. Yep.
Cloudflare actually has a good, if you set this up correctly and you go to 1.1.1.1/help,
yeah,
it will actually give you a readout if you're talking secure over HTTPS or TLS.
But that's just the communication, not necessarily the DNS.
If you have the DNS set up correctly,
okay.
set up correctly, and you go to that web page, it will tell you if you're what server you're connecting to, and if it's talking HTTPS or TLS.
Good. Now, so I'm thinking, as far, I have a daughter, so with parental controls, like what is this going to mean for parental controls? What is this going to mean for governments? Like if you're trying to block pornography, child pornography sites. If I want to set up parental controls, it's kind of a lot of the ways that these companies do that. Like Cox would say, okay, well, I'm just tell me what they're going to be searching for. What is the website they're putting in? We'll block that. Or, whatever the case may be. What is the implications there of how this could cause issues on the other side of things?
On a personal way, you can set up a Pi-hole and be able to, they have actually formats and screenings and templates that you can use to be able to block everything from dating sites, drug use, porn sites. You can go through this entire template and set that up. A number of both Cloudflare and Quad9 offer different levels of DNS responses that you can sign up for. And so if you point your DNS server at, I think it's 9.9.8.8 is they're filtered, which gives you basically what you would want your daughter restricted to.
Yeah.
So they're providing the service that allows you to select if you want that restriction.
Yeah. But that would have to be someone fairly technical, I would imagine, at least aware, to be able to set that up. Because, usually I would imagine that most parental controls need to be pretty user-friendly, which I know we talked about, that's a balance, So I guess maybe this is something that as these companies move forward, is they build that in as a user option where, they could help make that easier for these type of things. So
I highly encourage every parent to lock down their internet, because all the best hackers I know had restricted parents, and they had to figure out how to get around it.
Create good hackers.
We'll create good hackers if you restrict the internet of your teens.
There we go. I actually haven't heard that before. That's actually makes me laugh a lot.
Have a conversation with a hacker and say, how did you get into it? Well, my dad locked down the internet when I was 12. And
there usually is some story where I didn't have access to this, so I found a way around it.
Right. And there's always a way around it.
There is, yeah.
But this is a really good first step for the major browsers out there that are making it simpler, easier to secure your communication, and which helps everything. It's kind of missing why Microsoft hasn't jumped on this, even with their Edge product. They won't even talk about it or won't even think about going towards this.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to see them doing it. I'd like to see more companies, anybody that does a browser. I know Brave does. A couple of other of the smaller browsers do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's the trend, so it'll, I guess, as it becomes more commonplace, and as applications and things adjust, it'll be what the standard is. So. Right. Yeah.
And as they make it simpler, simply a browser checkbox or an item like that, more people will be able to, just simply access it. Yeah.
And with obviously Chrome and Mozilla, Google Chrome and Mozilla Firefox going towards that direction, that's a huge step.
Right.
So, pretty cool. Any other last thoughts about that?
That's good.
Cool. So away from the kind of IT world, for some of the sciencey people out there, we found an article recently about obviously the THC, the vapes, the cartridges, some of those, all the people dying. I'm sure everyone has seen like the articles popping up about people against vaping because now it's killing everyone. We were looking at an article about black market THC cartridges, and kind of some of the chemicals that they have in them, and kind of some of the issues around that. And we talked about a little bit before the show started some of the reasons why this is an issue, that there's no regulations, or it's hard to regulate, or too many regulations, and it's hard to standardize things. So what's your opinion on that? Let's start. We can start with the cartridges first, if you want. But.
Well, what they're finding in the cartridges, they're finding a good amount of vitamin E that when you put it through the vaporizer, it actually changes into some fairly active acids and carcinogens.
Okay.
And some of them had pesticides in them, because when you're growing marijuana, you have to grow as much as possible in the smallest space as fast as possible, which means you can't have any pest, and you have to give them as much growing material as possible. And you're doing it in a confined space. So because grow houses typically, except in very few states, have to be obscure.
Yeah.
And if they're in other countries such as Mexico or Central America, they might have even larger restrictions on how they might be able to grow it, and they might take even more desperate acts, which causes more contamination of the initial product. The pesticides and the metals that they're finding are coming from the grow houses in their effort to,
which is ending up in these black market THC cartridges.
Right. And so there's no testing for this. There's no studies done on this, because per federal law, in order to get a study set up to study marijuana or the effects of THC, you have to jump through these huge amount of hoops. Nobody wants to fund it. So nobody knows what a minimum dose, like alcohol, they can say if you're above this level, they've done the testing of what it is. Those tests have not been done, and there's no standard.
Because of the regulations, because it's so strict.
Right.
Well, I mean, I know that, I know I've talked to people who work with companies here now that it's been legalized in Las Vegas and Nevada, with the level that they go to make sure that their plants are pure, and that the product will be pure, and that it'll be healthy at the end point. It's amazing the effort that goes into it, like from the growing process to making sure that if there's any feces or anything on the plant, they destroy the whole crop. And it's just astounding. And it goes from this level, from production to the lab, and the test that it goes through in states. But obviously that's state by state. And then from there to production. But this is obviously the issue we're finding is black market problems.
Right.
Because these are states that it's not legal in. This is where there aren't these standards in place. And I'm sure even if we bought something black market here in Las Vegas, that would be the same issue. There's no standards, there's no protection like you would have if you go buy meat from the market from the FDA, making sure that there's these standards in place.
So the grow houses in Nevada and California and the dispensaries, they all want to have the best product, and they don't want anything to go wrong. They don't want this to be happening, and they try their hardest to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen in their product, because they don't want to be any more regulated than they already are, or investigated, or they're already a challenged business.
Yeah.
Regulatory wise, monetary wise, social dogma around marijuana. So they want no attention, bad attention on their business. So they go, if they have a legal business, they're going to do everything they can to maintain that status,
that standard,
and that perception of what they do.
Yeah. And I actually have noticed that with the IT security company I work with, there's actually a lot of people that they just don't want to touch it. They would just rather be away from marijuana industry in general, the THC industry, just because of this, like you said, that stigma around it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of legal stigma. There's a lot of banking rules that like
everything
they can't
cash. Yeah.
Everything has to be cash, which is a huge hazard for them. Then in the state of Nevada, there's Nevada gaming rules, which has to go around banking rules and federal law. And so if you work for a grow house, your brother can't work for a casino.
Yeah.
Interesting. Rules like that. If I'm a construction company and I put in the plumbing for a grow house, or I do electrical work for a dispensary, I can't work for a casino for a year because the business has to be separated. There's a lot of regulations around that, and they're already penalized. So when people act like this and do these things, it greatly affects that business.
Yeah. And I mean, another point with that is just with the uniqueness of the industry and things that you don't really think about. I know that kind of learning more about it, it's interesting, even all these products that they have to destroy, if they have something that goes wrong or there's something wrong with a batch, or they have to actually, the path that they have to pour bleach on it all and then burn it. And then there's like the ways that they have to destroy it, because the problems that they get with security is these places like the dispensaries and the security around them is because they have people dumpster diving in their security. Right. They have people trying to break in and figuring out what this waste is,
right.
Because it's, obviously the product that they sell is highly sought after by people who would be willing to dumpster dive
right.
and look for the product. So. And there's just a lot around the security of it, just physicals and even like the technical side of it, with trying to make sure, like you said, that it's all cash sales. So that obviously there's large amounts of cash in these places where people are coming in buying. Obviously they can do some electronic now, or they have the ATMs there, but all cash sales right. Causes issues, and right. some of those interesting things you don't think about with when they destroy them. That just the whole process is interesting.
Yeah, I've never been a vape person.
Yeah.
Are they called vapors?
I
don't know.
I should say vapors, sure.
I don't know. I've had people like show me, like this is what it is, and it's like, hey, this tastes like banana. I'm going, yeah, that's great. And then you go read like a carton somewhere that has banana flavor in it and the chemicals that it takes to create make banana flavor.
I've never thought about that. Yeah.
It's like, they're not putting bananas in there.
Yeah.
So it's
natural flavor, yeah.
or strawberries. So there has to be a significant amount of chemicals to make that flavoring
to make up for the
right. And what's happening to those chemicals when it gets exposed to that?
But do people think about that? I mean, we eat, like, what do we have in our stores? Like, what are the things that people eat every day?
I agree.
That they, like, even...
And it's probably as bad to our insides as, vaporized vitamin E is to your lungs. So the difference is it has a much...
we
have a much quicker impact and more...
Yeah, we're going into your lungs versus your tract and your liver. That's meant to process out toxins and stuff, which your lungs are not, generally designed like a liver is to process toxins. Now that's interesting. I didn't think about the flavoring, and I mean...
Right. It's like, hey,
I can't
tastes
wait
like bubble gum, and it's like, yeah, how do you... What makes bubblegum flavor? And what does it do when you put it in fire and then inhale it?
Yeah, there we go. So, but yeah, we've heard a lot recently about the THC just the cartridges in general, the vaping. Right. I'm hearing more commercials about stopping to vape and trying to get people to stop vaping. But I guess just stay away from black market stuff in general. I think is good advice.
As long as there's a market for it, it'll exist.
Yeah.
And so they've actually run, one of the things that's causing this is the availability of legal THC products and other products, because it's pushing down the price of the black market stuff. So they have to cut corners in order to be able to make the money that they did before. So the cost of their product has now been pushed down. So what they manufacture.
So they're cutting corners by,
Yeah.
Interesting. So I don't know. So what's the solution there? So the more things become legal, the less, hopefully, the more research that's done on the effects, the causes, so you can get more standards in place. And hopefully kind of, I mean, if you think about it, when Prohibition was there was so many, speakeasies, or so much, people making moonshine. Not that you can't make alcohol yourself nowadays, and I know this is a little bit different, but how often are you like, hey, I got some moonshine back here. You guys want to buy it? But it's like...
It still happens, but
yeah,
the price is high enough that they don't have to cut those corners that they did during Prohibition. The same thing happened.
Yeah.
The problem with this is that the legislation isn't, it's like pseudo legal.
Yeah.
It's not really legal. It's being allowed. And that's really the tripping point that's causing this, is that it's not fully been addressed. And it would change it, just like there's nobody starting grow houses and growing tobacco and then making fake cigarettes. There's people stealing cigarettes and then selling those cigarettes on the black market.
Yeah.
But nobody's making fake cigarettes because the cost would be too astronomical, because it would be over the price that they could get for the cigarette.
That's
and
true.
So the real fix here is to make it legal enough to where it's a business that can contend with the black market on their market cap of like alcohol, cigarettes. Now, if you made cigarettes legal tomorrow, or pseudo illegal tomorrow, there would be a black market that would pop up
for cigarettes. Yeah, and I guess that's the capitalism. That's the making it accessible, making it that there's no business and having these bootleg, these black market items.
Right.
I know someone mentioned in the live stream that people were getting heavy metals through e-cigarette vapors.
Nickel and
that was some of the other things in there besides pesticides and stuff.
Yeah, it was doing nickel through the which is part of the pesticide.
It was actually part of
is nickel, is some heavy metals that they put in there. So yeah, that's what the cheap pesticides have. It's supposed to be for stuff that you don't eat.
Which goes back to the same thing. It's that they're trying to cut corners, trying to make it more profitable. All right. Any last thoughts on the cartridges? I think we've talked pretty good. And then the last thing I have that we talked about beforehand was the U.S. might be measles-free again.
Yeah.
Despite all the anti-vaxxers' best efforts.
I know, right? It's like
and so, 5 more days?
Yeah, 5 more days.
5 more days and counting?
Yeah, and we can be considered a measles-free country for the first time in a year.
There we go. That's something to celebrate. Have a drink for.
Well, they in Washington State and in New York State, they had to literally, by court order and under escort of federal marshals, make people vaccinate their kids, and it stopped them. It stopped the measles.
Yeah.
And everybody, you won't die. Yeah, you can die, and you can also ruin your liver and ruin your kidneys.
Yeah, and there's the kids who are immunocompromised, who you got to have that herd immunity. So that's something to celebrate. So 5 days, we should do a countdown.
There we go.
Countdown hashtag. There
we go.
Measles-free U.S.
Right.
So again, make America measles-free again.
Yeah, and personal anecdote, in 1954, my oldest brother, who was like 9 years old at the time, he actually died from the measles.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So it's real.
Yeah.
And
it was...
so, I think that so many people, especially with this new generation, that haven't seen these things like polio, that haven't seen measles, that haven't seen smallpox, that they don't see the severity of it.
Right.
When someone like you, it's just like, it's really...
Right.
Like, he could die, but you're choosing that over...
It's... Of all the things that we've done that's actually worked and worked as planned, vaccination is one of the things that's worked, and it's worked as planned. It's kind of crazy, the hysteria that's brought around that, but probably the most interesting thing was how fast people flipped.
Yeah.
When particularly in Washington State, how fast they went from like, I'm not vaccinating to my kid, and like, oh my God, vaccinate my kid.
Yeah.
and it went fairly fast. They were surprised about once it started directly impacting people, and people were in the hospital, and they're like, "Hey,
and seeing
neighbor down the
the
road,
kids struggling to breathe from
Right.
whooping cough, seeing that,
yeah.
like pictures of that, yeah. And I think that's interesting because that, brings back to a few episodes ago when I was here last. We talked about, fake science and people just not fact checking. They hear these celebrities, they hear people, saying things, and they just were ready to believe it or ready to kind of jump on that boat. Which, really brings us back to really just like do your research and look at, in my opinion,
do your research, not on Facebook."
Yeah, not on Facebook. And look at where the money, like, not just money, but like look at where, like, I have family members who are doctors, family members who are scientists. They vaccinate their kids. There's a reason. If it was something that was going to harm their kids, they wouldn't be giving it to their kids.
Yeah.
It's not like they're going to be tricking this whole community of doctors and scientists into vaccinating when it's really bad for them.
Yeah, well, you live in Vegas, which is the party capital of North America, and nobody calls in sick for a Vegas trip. So we get hit with everything, and people come here, and they come here sick, and there's been, let's say in the last 6 months, there's been 3 known instances of where people with measles have gone through the airport here.
Oh boy!
And they've had to track people down who've been on airplanes with those people, and just to
just to warn, let them know,
so they could track it. There's been probably maybe in the last year probably 15 times that they've had to hold an airplane because somebody on there was sick until they figured out what was happening. And this is just Vegas.
Yeah.
And like I said,
I
nobody
didn't
calls
think
in
about
sick
that
for
living here in Vegas, that this is going to be the hub of the disease that spreads everywhere.
Well, it does, because what happens is like in a major holiday, tens of thousands of people come to Vegas. A significant portion of them are probably sick or carrying something. And when I mean maybe 2%, maybe 3%, and then they expose everybody they bump into in that period, and then they all get on planes and disperse back across
the world,
right,
even,
right. And between
I feel like we could make a zombie movie about this.
It's true. Yeah,
we're
always the epicenter. We should always
be the epicenter.
We should always be the epicenter of a zombie apocalypse is Vegas.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's if you live here, get your jabs. That's all I can say.
Yeah. You should do it anywhere. So.
Yeah.
Even if you don't live here, even if you live in, nowhere, Idaho.
Absolutely.
I don't know why I picked Idaho.
Because one of your neighbors will visit Vegas.
One of your neighbors will visit Vegas. Because everyone goes to Vegas somewhere you live.
That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's just an astounding. It's one of those things that, if people, it's fear that drives them. Fear of, they don't know, like you said, like you had a brother who died from measles. They don't know that side of it. They haven't seen it in their lifetime.
Right.
And they make decisions based off of fear and this propaganda, the fear propaganda, which obviously is what rules a lot of propaganda.
Right.
And it just, educating people, getting people to do the research, getting people to actually, use common sense when it comes to things like this.
Well, if you look at pre-1900 in the United States, when you turn 21, 1/3 of all the people that you knew in your lifetime had died by disease.
Yeah.
You would have lost 1/3 of the people in your life. That was the average across the United States in prior to 1900.
Yeah.
And before there was vaccination, before there was any type of modern medicine that we know today, which vaccination is a huge part of, I don't think you could find anyone who's grown up in the United States that would have a story along those lines. But that was commonplace 125 years ago.
Can you imagine when the polio vaccine came out? And I know this celebration when the people that desperate to get this vaccine, to look forward and to now where they'd be like, people are refusing it.
Yeah.
Like the hysteria. They'd be like, what is wrong with the future?
Yeah.
The depression, I'm sure that would ensue.
Well, it's, that's in the United States where we have these great choices, and we have this built-in safety net of being able to isolate ourselves. But when you go to countries like Pakistan, which polio is just running rampant in the Kashmir area in Pakistan, and the warlords there pretty much use that as
Is that their control?
control. That so
Yeah.
so they basically tell people not to get polio vaccinated, and it's huge, and it's there, and if it's there, it can come here
Yeah.
very quickly,
Yeah.
and we probably wouldn't be hit as bad, but you go into parts of Africa where they were having the oh, what's that hemorrhagic fever that they Ebola.
Anybody? Okay. Yeah.
They were having Ebola, and there again, the people were attacking the aid workers because they thought they were causing Ebola by giving the vaccinations.
Yeah.
And
It's that propaganda. Yeah.
It's
Fear to control.
I think the idea of the vaccination, talking about the vaccination, causes this fear to happen because it's a scary topic.
Yeah.
I think on its own, it's a scary topic to talk about, and people are more likely to react to that fear that it causes.
And I think that actually kind of will nicely wrap up the whole show.
Yeah.
That information being public, freely accessible, so we
Right.
can fight against this propaganda, fight against the
Yep.
fear.
Yep.
Knowing is always better than not knowing, no matter how scary it may be. So I think that's great. We actually have run out of time.
Yep.
And as I guess Master Chin would say, but not out of things to say, and
There you
not
go.
exactly in those words.
I got you.
But it's been great, and then thank you so much for joining me today and not leaving me by myself to do an hour monologue. Thank you to the audience and for everything that's been added. And we will see you guys next week, 7:30.
Yeah. See you guys next week.
See ya.